You ready, my friend?
Yeah.
Good evening and welcome to the first Digital Culture Seminar for the fall semester 2022. It's a real thrill for me to introduce you today to Dr. Tito Rivas. Tito is an academic, a curator, a sound artist, a performer, a field recordist, and somebody who thinks extremely deeply about what these processes of recording and reproduction and archiving mean. He was one of the key people in the team that set up the Fontaneca, which is a national sound archive in Mexico. And as he will point out, the processing of the process of archiving is one that is continuous. We constantly make new sounds in the world. We constantly lose sounds from the world, such as indigenous languages. One might think of the mechanical typewriter, etc. So sounds that are critically part of our environment that disappear over time, and new sounds that come into our environment. The sound of the modem connecting, for instance, being one that perhaps is more recent. So his work has been based around these questions of the kind of ethics and the intention of sound, and this notion of phonography, the kind of fixing or capturing of the sound object. He is currently one of the directors at the Museum Ex Teresa Arte Actual in Mexico City, where he's just finished curating a very large exhibition. And as I said before, he was the Deputy Artistic Director of Fontaneca, the National Sound Archive in Mexico, and many, many other attributes that are here in his bio. So without any further ado, would you please welcome Tito Rivas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garpain. I'm really pleased to be here and grateful for the invitation. Of course, grateful with Arizona State University. And this possibility of being here has been very inspiring for me. To share and to know this place is my first time. So I really enjoyed the days here and the people that I met. So thank you very much to all the team of the AME program, which I really appreciate the possibility of sharing these ideas that I would like to do with you. First of all, I would like to apologize if my English is not quite accurate. My native language is Spanish, so I hope you can forgive if some of my words are not perfectly pronounced, or maybe the structure of my thinking is on the opposite as we think in Spanish, that we think the syntactics of our language is always on the beginning in the beginning, and you begin with the end. So okay, I'll try to do my best, but please feel free to let me know if something is not really clear. The idea is to have a talk in which you can also participate, and I will let my best will do my best effort to let you follow these ideas. These ideas have been developed by me during the last years. When I want to share some part of my PhD work, which is still also in process, and so I will try to make a very resume as compact as I can about what we can think about an archaeology of listening. You may say maybe that what has to do archaeology and listening, or archaeology and sound, because yeah, I mean, maybe we relate usually archaeology with digging on the soil and taking out objects to find how ancient cultures, which behaviors they have, or which customs or which practices they have. So maybe it could be a little weird to think about, or to understand what has to do this archaeology work with the sound, because sound is a very technological stuff, and also it has to do with listening and with a very subjective experience, which could be seemed like it's very far from this objective activity, which is archaeology. So if I could let you some insights of what I think they are related, maybe will be successful, this talk. And I will want also to share some examples of how we can do this work of an archaeology to think on sound and listening. Well, first of all, I'm sharing this image that I really liked, because it's an ear, an ancient ear carved on the stone by the ancient Hellenists, and this inscription of an ear was dedicated, as you can read, to Seraphis and Isis, that were Egyptian goddess deities, and in this stone, the idea of the people that devoted to them was a prayer for them to hear them. So for me, it's interesting to begin with this image, because as you will see, we are going into the idea of how we think that people from the past listen. If it's a way to think how others than how they listen to, and how others not from my period or my historical time listen to. This is a little about the talk I'm going to give you. Let's think what archaeology means first, maybe, because maybe all of you know a little about sound and listening, but maybe it's not the field now that we are related to in a arts, media, and engineering program about archaeology. When I say archaeology, I am doing in a very specific way. First, I love to go to the etymology of the words, because I think sometimes the etymology really illuminates what the words are made for. So in this case, archaeology, it's made of two words, as phonography that we were saying on the talk in the morning. Archaeology, it's made by two words. That the first is arche, which comes from the Greek. That could be something like the origin. When we say the arche of something, we mean the origin, but also not only the origin, but the constitutive element that makes something. When we go to the arche of something, where the Greeks were thinking about what makes unique something, what makes the very constitution of a thing or of a concept. And the otherwise, in the other side, there is logos, which everybody knows. Logos is very used for all the sciences. It wants to mean a treatise of something or a discourse of something. In this case, we are going to think archaeology as the discourse of the origins of something, or the elements that makes something raise up, grow, and become something that exists in the world. Okay, well, we're going to start just with this very primitive definition. So when we think in archaeologists of listening, we may think on the possibility to explore what is traced, what is printed, what is written down in some kind of surface, could be, or in some case of machine, in which some practice of listening are fixed or are announced to us, and this will be related with some that we call orality. That is a term that exists most in English than in Spanish. In Spanish, we must say auralidad, and it's like a new concept for us because auralidad is not really a very used concept, but in English it does exist, and it has to do with how the operations of the ear when it perceives something. Now we are going to discover how this operation is culturally mediated. This is like one of the first hypotheses we could offer from an archaeological perspective of sound. You will see how, I hope. When we hear, we deal with sound, okay? But not also with sound, but with something that we can imagine in the middle, which is what make us listen in some specific way. What I would like to mean with this is that it's not the same, the sound we hear, the sound that sounds by itself and the sound we hear. I can make the sound of this bottle, for example, which is not very noisy, but so this object makes a sound by itself, but the way you hear it is mediated by different layers. One of these is the space, because it's not the same how I listened here, that I am very near to the object, than you that are with some distance into it for the first time. But also, there are ways in which we listen to this object. The idea of an archaeological hypothesis of sound and listening is that we do not hear in the same way, and this is, as I said before, mediated by different things. Which kind of things we can imagine that are mediating our relationship with sound? Let's think about it. We can consider that we have the sound, any sound you want to imagine. Could be a musical sound, but could be also the sound of a voice or a sound that is made by a body on the space. And we have the process of listening to it, okay? Which are not the same. We usually think that it is some kind of transparency between what is sounding in the space and what we perceive of this. But it's not that transparent. There are some strata, we will begin to say, that are on the middle. There is a kind of mediation that gives shape to what we hear. And this is very important for everybody or anybody that wants to work with sound, because sometimes it's in the mediation where the very expression of sounds really exists. Not the sound by itself, not exactly what we pretend that the audience listen, but what they are really listening, that is always something that we really don't know. I mean, I'm not so sure how you are listening to me just right now. I can imagine that you are listening to my voice, and that my voice have some acoustic qualities that will remain the same for all of us, but the specific way in which every head that it's on this room, which its own specific pair of ears are hearing to this, is a mystery. Sound is very interesting because it's something that could be, that even if it's placed on the space and exists physically and it has a materiality, it really is a very subjective way when it becomes a listened sound. And we cannot know what is really listened or heard by someone else, because to do it, we will have to be inside their heads, which is, until we know now, impossible. Of course, there are some sciences that are working into that. But for the moment, we can consider that each head is really autonomous and independent, and it's really difficult to get in others' head to know what they are exactly listening to. Okay? Are you following me to the moment? Okay. So there is a mediation between sound and listening. This mediation could be materialized by different things, as I said before, different layers that we can call it. One of these, and this is that my presentation will be focused, what we can call the aural artifact. The aural artifact, we are going to think in the material object that makes some kind of sound or is made to produce some conditions of sound that are going to be conditions that produce the act of listening. If, for example, I'm not going to do it, but if I have here, for example, an electric guitar, and I bring with it an electric amplifier, and I turn on and start to play for you, the machine, the artifact will build and display specific conditions of listening for you that will be completely different if I bring an ukulele. The way the artifact is made, its materiality, the projection that of the sound that it is inside of the object, it's a condition of create some ways of listening that are different depending on the objects that are created to make sound. Okay? To all this network, because I think we should think it as a network that relates the sound that is produced, the sound that we hear, that we said is not the same, the mediation that it's on the middle, conditioned in this case by the different aural artifacts that we create to produce sound, we can call to all this an aural device. We'll see how we are thinking on this aural device. But so then, when we think on an archaeology of listening, we are really thinking on the technology. To think also on the word technos comes from the Greek technai, which means an art to do something, the way to do something. That's the very basic concept of a technique. And logos, again, is the discourse, is the knowledge that we put into the way of doing something. So technology is all the rationalization, all the method to make something in some way. So when we are doing archaeology of listening, we are dealing with the technology, which is the logos of the technique, and also we are dealing with some concept of sound that is behind the device that is working on the moment. We think that sound is like a universal, natural, physical concept. But if we have an archaeological approach, we should better think that sound is also a cultural epistemological construction. Sound as an object has been made during the history. So the concept that we have now of sound is different from the concept that, I don't know, the Greeks had, or Yaquis had, or ancient Indians had. Because, as I said before, sound as a concept is mediated by this thing, by this network that we can call aural device, okay? Which is made of forms of enunciation. How do we think about sound? How we define it? How we understand it? And forms of subjectivity. How do we, what we do with that, with our own bodies, with our own selves, okay? So these relationships between artifacts creates what we can call fields of knowledge hearing, because there's always some kind of knowledge related with some kind of practice of hearing. What we propose here is that the listening practice is not innocent. I mean, it's not free of the concept of sound and of the concept of what listening means are displayed on that special activity. We will see how this works in a more eloquent way. Well, yeah, let's go to that, because this could be a little theoretical. I have been working a lot on this categorization, but I don't want to get you tired with all this. I can give you after some, places where you can consult all this in a more theoretical and philosophical way if you are interested, okay? So what I would like to do is to share with you a very small, which is not a small, but I will try to do it fast, history of soundscription machines. We usually think that the inscription machines started in 19th century with the invention of the phonograph by Mr. Thomas Alva Edison, who can be seen on the picture. Nice picture, no? By the way. But my research has been going far and trying to think what is behind this aural artifact that we are watching on the screen. This shape, this construction, this machine with all its mechanics and all its specific way of behavior has a long history, and it has condensed many layers that if we go back in history, we can find here and here spreading. So my job in the last years has been following these threads and trying to put some things together that I found. I will just share some of them with you if you feel that this is interesting. First of all, I would like to propose you to think on something. Look what Thomas Alva Edison is doing there. What is he doing? He has his hand on his ear, and what he's doing. What will you say? What he does? He's listening. Yeah. Okay. For all of us, it's very eloquent that this image reveals someone listening. Okay? So my archaeological question is why we think that that means listening. And the proposal is that this gesture related to that artifact only works as a concept of listening from 150 years since now. And before, there were another possibilities of imagining listening that were growing and were, as I said, harvesting in different places and different thoughts that show us another ways of listening practice, or at least the inception of what listening through an artifact can be. Because as you may see, what is illustrated here is a gesture of listening, but it's not just listening, it's listening through something, doesn't it? To listen, this image, what it seems to say is when you listen through the way of something that is an artifact. And my proposal is that our contemporary culture thinks that listening is really listening through an artifact. But not always has been like this, or not in all the cultures this happens. Our listening has been shaped by many layers, many of them coming from technology, but thinking on technology, as I said before, technos and logos, or a very hard and wide apparatus of thinking that is behind the very and innocent notion of sound and listening. Let's have a path into it very, very fast because we don't have a lot of time. For example, we can start this history in many, many moments, but I will do it from here. Do you know maybe Sir Francis Bacon? Or maybe you know one of his more famous works, which is The New Atlantis. This work has been written in 1626. And on this work, which makes part of a group of works that are called utopian, because they were planted how the Renaissance that has been just started in Europe was imagining the new cities and the new urban relationships. New Atlantis was part of this corpus of works in which the thinkers of that time were imagining the cities of the future, or as the word utopia means, a place that is not really there, a no place. Okay? So in this work, which is very nice, and I invite you to read it, Bacon relates a ship that arrives to an island. It's like a novel. And when it arrives to the island, they find that in this island called Ben Salem, the people that lives there has a very developed, we should say now technology, but on that time the word doesn't exist, in which I will try to make it bigger, this image? Well, I will show you just a scrap of that image, in which they have different houses in which they experiment with different kind of things. Will be long to describe the whole work, but there's a part in which they describe what they call the sound houses. Let me just read it because maybe you will find interesting. He said that the inhabitants of the island are saying to the visitors, "We have sound houses where we practice and demonstrate all sounds and their generation. We have harmonies which you have not of quarter sounds, and lesser sleights of sounds, diverse instruments of music likewise to you unknown, some sweeter than any you have, with bells and rings that are dainty and sweet. We represent small sounds as great and deep. Likewise, great sounds extenuate and sharp." Look how they say this in a moment. We're talking about 1626, which none of all the machines that we already know to represent sounds and to make it smaller or bigger exist at all. But in the imagination of the 17th century, it started this idea of how you can deal with sound through the new machines that were created in the Baroque century. But this has a history in the back, because the New Atlantis could not be written if in the 16th century were not exist the natural magi, or the magicians, as we could say now. Natural magic was some kind of knowledge field between magic and science, in a moment that there was no really complete definition of science as we have today. In that moment, magic was part of the science, and natural magic was the way to find hidden things, hidden laws into the things, just to say it very, very small. Gianbattista della Porta, which was one of the best known magics, or magis, as they say, of this time, he composed this book, very interesting, that it's called Natural Magic, in 20 books, which is really, really funny and amazing to read, in which he is maybe one of the first to start talking about how we can process sound, and how we can, for example, speak at a great distance. He said, there are many ways how we may speak at a very great distance, with our friends that are absent, or when they are in prison, or shut up in cities, because there were war times. So in some moment, the city has been closed by the enemy, so you cannot communicate with your friends. So Battista della Porta was thinking how to do it. And he says, this could be done by putting some sound in a trunk, putting sound in a tube. This is like the very first time that somebody, at least written, the idea of putting sound through something. As simpler as a very long tube that you should connect from the outside of the city, so you will speak through the tube and your friends will answer you, okay? And well, it's very interesting to study how the way he develops this idea and the concept of sound that they have on this moment. I will not go deeper into this because it will be very long, but believe me that the concept of sound that the 16th century, the 17th century and 16th century had in Europe was really, really interesting. And if we study from now, will reveal a lot of meanings of how now we deal with sound and how we understand and how different could be sound be understood depending on the cultural context. Okay? This story was very connected with the Talking Heads. I'm not meaning the David Byrne rock band, but the Talking Heads are fundamental for the creation of the mediation, the technological mediation of sound. In this moment, from medieval tales was very popular the idea of a head that by itself starts to talk, and if you make a question, he will answer with revealing some secret or some mystery. In the image, we are watching a graving from a play from the time of Shakespeare, made by Robert Greene, and he's telling the story of the Fry Royer Bacon and the Fry Bongai, which developed this magical head, which was meant to reveal the way to protect England from an external invasion. So they make a deal with some demons and they build the head. And well, it's a very funny story because in some moment they were so tired of doing the head, so they get asleep and they ask their student, Miles, which you can see on the right side of the picture, to awake them if the head start to talk. So in the comedy, because it's a comedy, in some moment the head start to talk, but only says the word "time is." So the student hear to this and say, "Wow, this has no sense. Of course, everybody knows that time is. I don't think that I have to awake my masters." And then the head says again, "Time is past." But he don't think this is really important. And finally, he says, "Time was." And after, immediately, the head falls down and get destroyed and silent forever. So when the father, the Friar Bacon and Bongai awakes, they found that all the 7 years they spent building this machine, it doesn't work anymore, and they never could really listen what the head was to say, which is a very interesting metaphor that I use to think on what is the very principle that these machine heads, these talking heads, has with what they do with time when they will register sound. You will see this, I hope. Of course, all this was made by alchemical practices. They were attributed this made of talking machines to philosophers and scientists of medieval age, like Royer Bacon, like Gerbert d'Aurillac, or like Robert Grosseteste, which now they are considered fathers of the modern science. But on this moment, in the popular tradition, they were magicians that create these magical heads that speak in some moment and reveal secrets. Also, Albertus Magnus was famous for this talking status that were connected with very ancient principles like Egypt, because the Europeans of that period thought that this possibility of talking of a statue were made first by the Egyptians. And there was a very interesting story, which is the Colossi of Memnon. I don't know if you know it, but these long statues that has like 38 meters height, in some moment of the time of the Roman period, that was said that the statues make a sound in the morning, a sound like a yelling. So these statues were visited by many people, like emperors or consuls or militaries from Roma. It was near to Thebes in Egypt, to hear the sound. And on the base of the statue, they leave their impressions of what they hear, like ancient graffitis in which they put, I am Tito, Andronicus, and I stay here and I hear how the statue start to do its mysteric sound. So this is related with the idea of how in the same structure and in a same machine, a sound can be registered. Of course, in this moment, there is no any kind of phonographic technology. It's only the possibility to register an aural experience made on the stone of the statue, made by the listeners. Okay? So these statues, it's supposed, some of them thought that were made by Hero de Alejandria. Hero de Alejandria was one of the first Greek engineers. He developed and deployed a lot of artifacts from the ancient world. But one of them was these statues that make sound. They made it by the concourse of water and air. So they were like pneumatic and hydraulic, if I am saying fine. So for example, that was applied for fountains, in which you, through passing some water to another, some water in a recipient to another, they make fill with air some pipes that makes a noise like a bird. Or for example, you can have this very nice device in which when you open the door of the temple, it makes a sound when it opens. Or these that were even built by Salomon de Caus. De Caus was an engineer that works for the gardens of Elizabeth, the prince, in the 17th century, in Heidelberg, in a very famous garden that it's supposed that was full with this kind of sound statues that make sound. But in this moment, the statues are not more magical, but they start to be mechanical. So it's like the very first time that we see an object that is made to produce and to fix a sound that is not a musical instrument. Of course, all this has been also related with cryptography, because on this kind of imaginations of working with sound, some thinkers were imagining how you can transmit a sound without being noticed by your enemy, for example. No? So if you put a sound into a tube, all the people that is outside the tube will not hear to it. So the sound will connect directly to the listener. And there were many, like Gustavo Selenus, that developed this possibility of the secret suggestion, as they called. So at the end, the talking machines were some kind of magic, but also some kind of new science that was developing on the time, but also these funny situations in which, for example, Tomás Aquinas, which was disciple of Alberto Magno, it's said that he had to broke the statue because she speak a lot. So he cannot concentrate in their studies, so he destroy it. No, so this grammar show it's very in a very funny way. So for that moment, it when comes to the scene, Athanasius Kircher, that maybe you know something about him. He's a very interesting personage of 17th century. He was German, but he lives in Rome in the Collegio Romano, and he was a Jesuit. So in that moment, the Jesuits were spread all over the world, the known world of the time, and they bring all the information that they took from China or from India or from America to Italy, and all this information goes directly to the desktop of Mr. Athanasius Kircher. So with all this information, this guy wrote more than 60 books. 60 books. One of them was the first treatise devoted to sound. And we are saying the portrait was called Phonurgia Nova, which was a neologism made by Kircher that would mean phonos, that is sound, voice, sound. Urgos, that means how to say it in English, the practice of something, like dramaturgic, for example, is the practice of the drama or the art of the drama. And nova, which means new. So if you translate it, you can say literally, Phonurgia Nova is the new sound art, which is funny to find the way of the concept of sound art in 1673. And this book is really amazing. I will just show you some of this, and I don't know how we are on time, but if we are getting closer, okay, I will run then. Kircher studied this group that exists in Syracuse, Sicilia, that it's called the Ear of Dionysius, because Dionysius was the tyrant that rules on Syracuse, and they have this mountain when there were these canales, these channels made into the grot. So the people that was on the top can hear what the people was saying on the bottom, on the down. And they put his prisoners there so he can hear what they were planning, or even some say that they be delighted when they were tortured with the screamings of their prisoners. So Kircher took this place. It exists, you can visit it in Sicilia, and start to think how you can travel the sound through the space. So he started to think how to amplify the sound with a very mythological way that I'm not going to explain now, but based on the Alexander horn, and how to spread it to the towns. For example, how to call for a mass for 2,700 people. And with all these designs that were based on the anatomics of the ear that were known by this time, he developed the concept of the tuborum cochleis, or the cochleum tube, which was a synthesis between the cochlea that was at that moment discovered, that was in the inner ear, which has this spiral way, this spiral form, and the possibility of the study of echo, which was very important on the 17th century. They made all these kind of studies, the Jesuits mainly, of how the echo behaves on the space, what they called the phonocampic space. So based on that, they think on how you can really drive sound from one place to another, but using the architecture. So he proposed these very interesting experiments in which the people that is, or the prince that is on the E room can listen to what happens on the rooms D, F, or S, okay? But even more, you can, with this system, you can, for example, have the voices that happen here and take it completely to the other side of the building. Something that now we could call schizophony, as Robert Murray Schafer says. The idea of put away the sound from its source to take it to other place. And you can do something like this. You can have musicians and the music will spread out through the architecture, which is really fantastic. So to end and to finish my reflection, because as you may say, this is very, very extended process. Well, Kircher at the end imagined that the talking head could be connected to these devices and have a new listening point that doesn't exist before it, because it's a new listening point in which you are in front of a machine that now we should call an interface. And what you are hearing are the sounds of the soundscape. And the way that Kircher describes us may make us feel that this is the first way in which somebody was thinking of what a soundscape is, which is also very interesting for those who are interested on soundscape. So I finish with this. What do you think is near or similar from these images and these designs from 17th century with this that happens on 19th century, with this machine that was thinked by Kircher, and this one that was the phonograph of 19th century? Could you see there? I see some shape that it's similar. The idea of having this kind of tube with the spiral and the horn shape, and with the idea of translating or transposing or transporting the sound to one place to another, which is what is happening here. The sound from the piano is transported, but now there's a new element, the apparatus, the artifact that is in the middle of the tube and the listener. And this is like the new artifact that 19th century will invent, that now we call phonograph. So my hypothesis is that in the conception of the phonograph are all these elements that were collected by the history in a very random way, forming like layers that now we can discover archaeologically, as if we go to dig into this conceptual and technological soil, to take it away and put it together to understand what anthropologists and archaeologists said accultural or acculture. So we could say by this method and by this approach, we can maybe know more about the listening practice of some place that we can call listening cultures, which will be different depending on the aural device, on the techne and the logos and the fields of knowledge hearing that are interweave to build this system in which people listen, not only by natural, but by the mediation of these new, very interesting sound artifacts. So that will be my my arguments. I hope you find maybe interesting, and if you have any question or something, I'll be glad. Thank you very much.
you want to manage questions, because we can see what's
We
online.
don't have any from two or did so far, so anybody in that?
Yeah, please.
Do you think Edison and other people developing the tubes and acoustic record the horns knew about these old ideas of Kircher?
I think they don't.
Yeah.
But I think they couldn't did without it. You know? So when we are thinking archaeologically, we have to think, it's a philosophical, could be polemic from a philosophical way, but we are thinking in a broader system that we share, that maybe we are not conscious of it. But the strata of knowledge, when we arrive to some field, the things that has been developed about something makes the disposition or the aperture to go or to get to some ideas. But in fact, there are no evidence that Edison could read Kircher. Of course, maybe he denied it, but maybe he read Charcot that we were saying in the morning, or he read Leon Scott Martinville, but they were from their same period. But these discoverings, Kircher was forgiven by the modern science because they consider him like a charlatan, like somebody that were more into the Catholic world, which was not so scientific, no Newtonian, because some years after Kircher comes Newton, and Newton really transforms the way we see science. So these kind of lost figures were lost, and until a couple of, 40 years or 50 years is that academics start to reading again Kircher. He was very famous on this time, but was completely, olvidado, forgotten, yeah. So that could be of course it's an hypothesis, of course. I don't know what really Edison was thinking.
There's a question on Zoom that is, all of the tubes reminded me of hearing trumpets. Could you talk a little bit about how the development of personal hearing devices may have been intertwined with sound production / carrying devices?
Well, yes, you're right. In fact, this was not far from the possibility of imagining these aids or these helps to the deaf people, for example. Gianbattista della Porta talked about he called it if I don't remember well, sound spectacles, like thinking on lenses, which were very famous in the period because of the development of the optics and then the telescope. So they start to think if they can do the same with sound, but to help the listener or the hard of listen, which were the people that were hard of listen, as they said, no? So yeah, they were related with this, and these tubes were also devoted to help hearing from the people. But in these devices, they take this possibility to a collective or to something that maybe we should call urban acoustic design, or architectural at least. Yeah, thank you for the question.
All right, we're done? Yeah. All right, thank
Okay.
you very much, Tito and Tito.
Thank you so much.